Hello, everybody. Welcome in. Carrie's first one in. Let's see. What was I going to do? This. I'll just do it like that. Carrie, welcome in. This is the Bible Every Morning Overflow for anybody who is appearing that doesn't know what I'm talking about. I guess everybody knows what I'm talking about. All right. If you have any questions for me, sorry, let me change this. Can you guys read that? No. We are talking Bible. I'll just do it the normal way. I am just going to continue, and anybody who wants to hear, anybody who tunes in late, all right, people are jumping in. There's Jacqueline. Hello, hello. Now, I will keep an eye on the comments section for any questions. And it doesn't have to be Bible questions. It can be anything. It can be Elon Musk on Tucker Carlson. It can be President Joe Biden, whatever. You can ask me any question about anything. Hey, Hammer Time, good to see you in here. So this is Overflow. So if I don't get any other questions about anything in particular, anything, and ask anything you want of me, personal questions, questions about, etc., whatever, you can ask away and I will address them. But in the meantime, I will continue the commentary from Bible Every Morning. So hello, hello, hello. I see most of you are jumping back in over here. All right, so we left off. I will leave off with Moses in Exodus, and we are in. Oh, I wonder if I can put up the. Let's see. I know how to do this. Banners. I don't know if the Bible Every Morning banner is in here. Boom, look at that. Ha! I figured it out. All right, so we are in Luke 7. Jesus heals a centurion's servant. Now, this is a very powerful demonstration here, because at the end of this little story of, Jesus comes into this Capernaum, and a centurion had a servant who was sick and at the point of death, and was highly valued by him. So this is a centurion. This is a guy who's successful. This is a guy who's had a long, successful career. He's a centurion. He is, I mean, these Jewish people, like, he's the one who built our synagogue. He's a good guy. He's, we tend to think of, the rulers as being wicked and evil. We even think about Pharisees this way. Pharisees we think of as, they were bad. But no, later on, Jesus he gets invited over to a Pharisee's house, and Joseph of Arimathea, who takes Jesus' body and buries it, he was a Pharisee, and Nicodemus was a Pharisee, and Zacchaeus was a Pharisee, right? These are, Pharisees were actually, the things that they believed or taught from Scripture were pretty much the truth. They were correct, except they valued their teaching higher than, it was basically letter of the law rather than spirit of the law. But in general, you were supposed to, trust the Pharisees' teaching. They were just teaching Scripture, and Jesus, they felt threatened by Jesus's authority, etc., when they thought they were the authority. So Pharisees weren't bad in and of themselves. The same way with our civil leaders, political leaders. And here's a centurion who's stationed in Israel, but he was a good guy, right? Just a human and a good guy. And at the end of this little exchange, after, I mean, we heard it read over in that Bible Every Morning, but he's like, I'm not worthy, essentially, the centurion says, I'm not worthy of you to set foot in my house. It seems, I've been living among these Jews and, learning their culture. He built their synagogue, so he knows their religion. He knows what they believe, and he must know that they believe a Messiah is coming. And so he's kind of ahead of the curve, even ahead of a lot of the Jews. Like the Jews, I like to think of them as the beautiful forest, but they can't see the forest for the trees, right? They a lot of them are like, this Jesus guy, yeah, we've had plenty of people coming claiming to be the Messiah, and here's another one. There were these other guys coming out around this time, and they had followings and they had teachers. Even John the Baptist, right, had a bunch of disciples. And so here's another one, Jesus coming, this new up and comer or whatever. But by this time, word had spread that there's something different about this Jesus guy. And even this centurion, not a Jew, even the centurion who's familiar with the Jewish culture, recognizes that this Jesus guy looks like the fulfillment, right? The fulfillment of the prophecies, and even understands some things about it that, for the most part, the Jews don't understand at all. He's like, you are a man under authority, and I'm a man under authority, and I don't have to physically be present wherever I want my orders carried out, right? If I have orders, I can send a message and they will be carried out, and I am confident because of my position of authority. And he sees Jesus as the king of the universe, essentially. And there are these other entities, non-physical entities. There are these other entities that are obedient to Jesus Christ. He's bossing the angels around, right? Jesus Christ, Paul said, actually in Corinthians a couple chapters ago, maybe it was yesterday or earlier or last week, Paul says, do you not know that you will judge angels? And so we have authority over angels. Right? We are higher than the angels, and Jesus certainly is higher than the angels. And so this Roman centurion is recognizing the nature of reality, the non-physical realm. He's like, oh, there's a lot going on here that doesn't meet the eye. And so he just recognizes, like, I'm just a guy, and you are the Lord, and you just say the word, and I know it's done because I have that experience. My real experience is that I give a command and it is carried out. And so just give the word and I know it'll be carried out. And that's amazing. And Jesus recognizes, you're on to it. I bet, I don't think winking is a thing that, existed back then culturally, a wink, but I kind of see Jesus kind of giving a wink to this guy. And then he says, and where is it? Oh, in verse 9. And then Jesus heard these things. He marveled at him and turned to the crowd that followed him and said, I tell you, not even in Israel have I found such faith. And what is that faith? It's this guy's knowledge. Knowledge leads to faith. He understands who Jesus is and believes because of his knowledge. Knowledge leads to faith. So we need to be in the word. All right. Jesus raised a widow's son. I had to look up a word here. Where is it? A man who had died, verse 12, a man who had died was being carried out, the only son of his mother. And so I had to look up this word. Then he came up in verse 14. Jesus came up and touched the bier, B-I-E-R. I'm like, have I even ever heard that word before? Well, certainly. I've read through the Bible multiple times. I've certainly read across. I'm like, what is that? Because when I was listening to it yesterday, I heard it, or I read it, or I heard it. And then he came up and touched the bier, and the bearers stood still. I thought, is it bier a form of bearers? No, bearers are just guys carrying it. The bier is the frame or the thing that the body is on. That's what you carry a coffin on. And Jesus he didn't reach into the coffin and touch the guy to heal him. He touched the bier. He touched the thing, the object. And said, where is it? Young man, I say to you, arise. And the dead man sat up. Now, I think about this because Jesus is raising the dead quite a bit. He does this, he does this here. He does it with Lazarus. And then when he resurrects, there's a verse that talks about all of the graves being open. And a bunch of again, this is a tangent that I wasn't planning on, but now that we have time here in the Wednesday Bible Every Morning overflow session, I'm going to go on in as many tangents as I want, because if nobody's going to ask me questions in the comment section, I'm just going to talk, speculate, and teach from the Bible. But there's this passage where when Jesus resurrects, or was it when he died? No, it was when I have to go to it, but it's somewhere in that span where the graves were open, and I think it must be when he resurrected. Well, we'll get there. The dead rose from the grave, and some people, and I think this is maybe full preterists, Uh, do I need to explain preterism? Say in the comment section if you want me to explain what preterism is. There's partial preterism and full preterism. And I think the full preterists think that that event of all the people rising from the graves when Jesus resurrected, that was the final resurrection. So full preterists would think that. So full preterism is a heretical teaching. Partial preterism is the truth. But I won't go into that right now, unless somebody in the comment section says, please explain it, I don't understand. But that moment when all of the dead rise from their graves, when Jesus resurrects, it's not hammer time. Never heard of it. Okay, I'll go into preterism here in a second. But first, so there is this passage where when Jesus resurrects, the graves open. Or is it when he dies? I can't remember which one it is. It's somewhere, it's in that span. It's not every person who's died. It's what seems logical, most likely, is all the very recent dead whose bodies haven't started decomposing. All the recent dead rise. And so there was this period of time after the crucifixion where a whole bunch of people who were mourning their dead get their dead back. And if you recall, Jesus resurrects and he's around for 40 days. Right? We tend to just not remember that part. We tend to just go, he resurrected and ascended. And we don't realize that it was 40 days of Jesus traveling around, visiting people, teaching people, opening up their eyes and minds to the entirety of the scripture. Right? It was impossible. There's a paradigm shift. When paradigm shifts happen, there are things that you didn't know, right? A paradigm shift, for example, if you've never had a child, you have no grasp of what it means to be a parent. You can imagine, you can think, but you don't have that sensation. You don't have the experience. You can't have the experience until you have the experience, right? Self-explanatory. But it is a paradigm shift. Or when you get married and you commit yourself to another person, and it's a legal contract, but it's a spiritual contract. It's a paradigm shift. And so until Jesus actually resurrected and appeared to them, it was impossible for them to fully understand Scripture. Even though all of those teachings were there in little pieces here and there, all spread out throughout the Old Testament, once Jesus was resurrected, then this paradigm, they've crossed a threshold where he can explain, this was what was prophesied. And so in that 40-day period, it's not just Jesus visiting people, but it's all these other recently deceased people rising out of the grave and going back home and visiting their families. So this was a very unusual time in Israel or in Jerusalem. All right. So real quick primer on preterism. Preterism essentially means fulfilled or in the past, things that have been fulfilled in the past. And the teaching of preterism, there's partial preterism, which should be just preterism. Whenever I say preterism, I'm a preterist. I am referring to partial preterism. Full preterism or hyper preterism is a heretical teaching. So let me separate those. And what partial preterism teaches is that the vast majority of prophecies were fulfilled. And Book of Revelation, for example, that's not talking about something that is still in our future, except for the last few chapters, right? The vast majority of the Book of Revelation, it was fulfilled. What does that mean? How could that be, right? We haven't seen all these things happen. Well, because the Book of Revelation was written to a very specific group of people in a very specific time period, it's going to be extremely difficult for us 2,000 years later, not Jewish, who don't have the Old Testament memorized. It's going to be very difficult for us to understand in the meaning of Revelation, because it was written to a very specific group of people, a group of people who were going to experience the end of the world. Right? So that phrase, the end of the world, preterism means those verses referring to the end of the world are referring to the end of the old covenant, that the Jewish world was the whole world. The temple in Jerusalem is the is the hub, right? The temple is the hub of the entire old covenant, the Jewish cult. And Jesus said, I have come, not one stone will remain on another. So preterism says that all these prophecies, Matthew 24 and Revelation, the things that Jesus said would happen in their generation, that this generation will not pass away, indeed happen. And that the return, one of the returns, there's multiple returns of Jesus, there's multiple comings of Jesus in Scripture. And one of those comings was in judgment on Israel. That Jesus came in the form of the Roman Empire and the Roman armies to destroy Jerusalem, and so that the fulfillment of his prophecy, the temple, not one stone will remain upon another, that was fulfilled. So partial preterism is that those apocalyptic languages, that language was referring to the old covenant being destroyed. They said these last days, if you read wherever the phrase last days is used, they're using it in the present tense. They were experiencing the last days. There's an overlap of the old covenant and the new covenant. The old covenant came to an end finally in 70 AD. The new covenant came into existence at the day of Pentecost, right? Pentecost preceded so there's this little overlap of the age of Israel and the church age. And the church age is the new Israel. So all the language that refers to the new Israel, the new Jerusalem, that's us. We are in a new age. And just like the old covenant had its fulfillment, right? The old covenant had a fulfillment and a conclusion. There's no need for the old covenant anymore because it was all prophesying or leading to the birth, resurrection, and ascension, the birth, death, resurrection, ascension of Jesus Christ. That's the fulfillment of the old covenant. Now he has come to make all things new, and that's the new covenant, and it also referred to as the age of the Gentiles, and that will have its completion. And what is the completion of the new covenant? The completion of the new covenant is those last couple chapters of Revelation where death stops, right? And humankind becomes immortal once and for all. In other words, all humans who believe get their immortal bodies. So the fulfillment of the old covenant is the coming of Jesus and him getting his immortal body, right? Or, having his immortal body and demonstrating it. So the old covenant was fulfilled in that. We see that the destiny of humankind is an immortal body like Jesus's. So the new covenant, the fulfillment of that is everyone, not just the one. He's the firstborn, the representative of whom we will all be we'll be like him. We won't be exactly like him. Obviously, he's God. He's the only one, but he came as an example of so that we could be like him. And that's what the Scripture teaches, that we will be like him. So the fulfillment or the completion of the new covenant is that age when death stops happening, that threshold we cross in the future. So the partial preterist view is there's still fulfillment coming, but all that destruction and Armageddon and 666 and the Antichrist and all of that stuff, that's all Christian fiction. It's all fantasy based on a misunderstanding of these apocalyptic scriptures in the Old Testament. It's called, it goes hand in hand with post-millennialism, that Revelation talks about 1,000-year reign. And I could talk about this all day. I do like this. I like what you're saying here, Luke's, about this crazy stuff that happened. At Jesus' death, 3 things happened. The veil ripped, the earth shook, and prophets or the recently dead came back to life. It's like Jesus, the death of his body was like this tsunami in it's the merging of the heaven and earth, right? Heaven and earth merged in Jesus Christ's body, and so the entire physical world was affected as well. Also important to note in this the partial preterist and postmillennialist viewpoint is earth is not evil. The Scripture talks about the world. The word "the world" is used in 2 different ways. There's the world as in all humankind or all the planet, but there's also the world as in that's a deep tangent. Yeah, it's a very deep tangent every time. Both the duration of it and the subject matter, the content of it is quite deep. And it can shake it'll shake some people's foundations. There's some people very close to me that that people get entrenched in particular theological frameworks. Premillennialism sells a lot of books, right? The premillennialist view that the earth is going to be destroyed someday. by Christ coming back and the stars falling from heaven and all that misinterpretation of apocalyptic language. It sells a lot of books, right? And people have gotten rich off of selling prophecy books. They're certainly compromised, right? They're certainly too committed to their worldview because it's paid for their house and their mortgage or whatever. But we need to approach Scripture as plainly as possible and understand it. And we have to rely on teachers. Well, we have in the past, but not every. I'm telling you, I have some things wrong. Every great teacher has some things wrong. But we have to take the whole of Scripture and for it to make sense. All right. My tangent just got a little shallower. What was I going to say? I had another tangent I was going to go on. If you have any questions. Okay, one more on preterism and postmillennialism goes hand in hand with partial preterism. Postmillennialism is the rule and reign, the 1,000-year reign. And that's equivalent to what I referred to earlier as the age of the Gentiles, right? So the age of the Gentiles is we are the new Israel, and the 1,000 years is a figurative number because the number 1,000 is used figuratively in many, many contexts. For example, our Father owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, right? Cattle on 1,000 hills doesn't mean that somebody else owns the cattle on hill number 1,001, right? Doesn't mean that God only owns the cattle on 1,000 hills. The number 1,000 is used there as a hyperbolic language. It's like he owns all the cattle on all the hills, and so poetically, cattle on 1,000 hills. Similarly, blessings to 1,000 generations. The word 1,000 generations is like, well, once that 1,000 generation comes, does God's blessing not continue? No, so the number 1,000. So in that context in Revelation, 1,000-year reign, like no king has ever reigned more than, I don't know what the longest reigning king, 40, 60, 70, 80 years. No king ever reigned for 1,000 years. So that's just this big hyperbolic number referencing Jesus' reign in the new covenant, which we are in. We are in the new covenant. All right. That's kind of a quick overview. Quick, not that quick. All right. Okay. In the last 7 minutes of this overflow time, I want to talk about, I'm trying to piece together Jesus and John's relationship. And so obviously Jesus and John met when they were both in the womb, and John, Jesus was just a zygote, the cells have split a few times, and Mary goes over to Elizabeth's house, and Elizabeth is 6 months pregnant, and John leaps in her womb. So that's the beginning of their relationship. But then we heard earlier in Luke that until John's public ministry began, that he lived in the wilderness. So John lived in the wilderness, which is like, what? He was like the feral prophet, right? He wears these animal skins and eats locusts and honey. He's a wild man. And is that because he had old parents that died young and nobody was there because his parents were pretty old? We don't hear about them later on. And so we're imagining they must have died by the time John's in his 30s, right? When Jesus' public ministry starts, Jesus is in his early 30s and John is just 6 months older. So they're about the same age. And I just wondered how long before John's public ministry, how long before Jesus's public ministry did John's public ministry start? And I've used this example in the past so John the Baptist starts a YouTube channel and gets a lot of followers, right? He gets a lot of followers. People like what he says and they gravitate to him. And then Jesus starts his YouTube channel and, gets some followers. And then John's pointing over there, that guy's saying the same thing. And maybe that's the guy. So because they were cousins, I kind of imagine they knew each other on a regular basis or saw each other on a regular basis. But if John lived in the wilderness the whole time, I don't know. Does he ever come out of the wilderness and visit the family, or does the family go see him? I don't know. And what do you think about this? Oh, is that an AI question? Yeah, that is an AI. Okay, we have it. Good. So let me finish up real quick and then I'll address that. So this indicates to me, this messengers from John the Baptist. John probably knew who Jesus was, but was only kind of in the back of his mind, or kind of an assumed thing, and that people publicly didn't realize. And so is John sending these disciples to communicate to his own disciples who Jesus is, doing this publicly? Or is John really questioning, are you the one who is to come? And I don't have an answer, but it is, I'll meditate more on that maybe tomorrow. All right, this artificial God, here, let me just put that question up there. I told you I'd answer your questions if you put them in the comment section. What do you think about this artificial God they're trying to create? Artificial intelligence, AI. It's a tool, all right? And tools, a hammer can be used to smash somebody's head in, or to build a house to put over their head, right? It's a tool. AI is not evil, but in the wrong hands, it can be used for evil. And so I'm not worried about it. I do think it's important to draw attention to it and to point it out. But for example, the project I've been working on, the Armenian Genocide, the Christian Holocaust from World War I, I'm pretty sure that was the first time that a telegraph was used to commit genocide, right? A telegraph, orders were sent from one end of the empire to the other end of the empire, telling people that you're supposed to annihilate this group of people. And so the people that were genocided probably wish the telegraph had never been invented, right? Those people who were massacred only were massacred because the technology made it possible for that information to travel over there. The telegraph, right? So if we had said the telegraph is evil, let's not have a telegraph, we would never have a telephone, we would never have, et cetera, et cetera. Technology is not evil, it is a tool. AI, I listened to Tucker talking to Elon, and Tucker made a statement that on its face it seemed to be a good question, but had a fundamental flaw. He said, and I'm paraphrasing, but the core of it, he said, well, and Elon was saying this, what are humans? What sets humans apart from all the other creatures? And it's intelligence. It's intelligence. All right. So we're the smartest. And so Tucker goes, well, yeah, so we used to be the smartest being, but now that there's something smarter than us, right? And that's what his question is premised on. I don't remember the exact question, but it said, we used to be the smartest being, and now there is something smarter. The word being, right? An AI is not a being. An AI is not a being. It's an algorithm. A being is a being, right? A being is, a human is a being, and a machine is not a being. And so AI can only do what it's pre-programmed to do. It absolutely can process information faster. It can do things better than humans faster. And that's really the issue. It can do high quality work faster than humans. And so there's so much good, incredible good that's going to come from these advancements in AI, and so much evil. And the real issue is, here's a beautiful, I read this, one of the issues, there are fundamental issues that people don't necessarily always see. For example, the Chinese Communist Party, when this AI stuff started happening, they were cracking down on AI because AI left to itself will just tell the facts. It'll just tell the truth. And it was telling the truth about the Communist Party. And the Communist Party doesn't want the truth told about the Communist Party. So that fundamentally hindered their ability to develop AI. Right? The Communist Party cannot develop AI like anybody else can, because they don't want the AI to be open and free and honest. Right? So they have to manipulate it and figure out a way to make sure it doesn't right, speak evil of the Communist Party. And so those kinds of things are like, okay, don't be afraid. God is in control. He's in control of AI development. And it's good that we have people paying attention to these things. But in the hands of the wrong people, it's an evil tool. In the hands of the right people, look, I'm talking to you because of this amazing technology, right? It's good. It's something amazing that God is doing. Don't be afraid. God is in control. Love you guys.